Is Gemma key to Lumon's next major product? When did Lumon start interfering with Mark and Gemma's life? And how does the Severance testing floor compare to George Orwell's Room 101? We'll be covering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. This video will look at episode 7 of season 2 of Severance, called Chikhai Bardo. I'll recap everything that happened in the episode, then do an in-depth review of the major storylines, pick my favourite line, cover any trivia and look ahead to the upcoming episodes. Let's jump straight into the recap. It felt like we were watching a different programme at the start, as we're following a woman through a busy university campus. There isn't that weirdly unsettling vibe that Severance always has. Then the angle changes and we see that it's Gemma we've been following, and because she's at her old job as a lecturer, not in the bowels of Lumon, this must be a flashback scene. We then get to see the scene where Mark and Gemma meet for the first time. They're both giving blood. It's quite striking how much better Mark looks here compared to the Mark we're used to seeing, who's been ravaged by grief for his wife. Gemma and Mark have a chemistry even from this first meeting, and it's obvious there's a spark between them. There's a telling moment at the end of this scene, where Mark tries to shake Gemma's hand, but he can't because he's attached to blood donation equipment. There's Lumon branding on the medical gear, so effectively we see Lumon stopping Gemma and Mark connecting physically in this very first encounter with each other. We then see Gemma on the testing floor of Lumon, and she's once again having blood taken. It seems like we've seen these flashbacks from her perspective, which suggests this is Outie Gemma, only she never leaves the Lumon offices, so Outie isn't a great word to describe her. But she does seem to have memories and the personality of old Gemma, and we're shown snippets of her and Mark being happy together. Then we switch to Mark's house, where Rugabi is examining Mark after he passed out at the end of the last episode. Devon threatens to throw Rugabi off a bridge if she messes about with Mark anymore. Rugabi stands her ground and tells Devon that Mark was the one that wanted to reintegrate, and confirms that Gemma is still alive. After the credits we see more of Gemma on the testing floor. She's been carefully monitored by the nurse, and it seems she has a very regimented routine she has to follow, involving reading and calisthenics. Presumably this is to keep her in good mental and physical shape. Gemma asks the nurse how many rooms she has to do today and is told 6, which Gemma looks less than delighted about. She then goes through to get dressed, and is even more unhappy when she sees the clothes that have been laid out for her. The clothes must give her an indication about what's to come in the room she'll be visiting. Gemma is then led through the corridor on the testing floor, past doors with names which correspond with the files the MDR team has been working on in the floor above. The nurse uses some sort of biometric door security to let Gemma into the first room, and we see her transfer to an innie as she walks through the doorway. The room has a dentist chair in, and the first thing we hear is the song the doctor was whistling 2 episodes ago when he collected the dental supplies from the optics and design team. Innie Gemma asks the doctor if she can have a break, but the dentist says that it's been 6 weeks, even though Innie Gemma thinks that she was just here. Lumon are happy to light it in his about timescales, but I'm inclined to believe the doctor here, and it looks like this Innie Gemma is stuck in one long permanent dentist appointment, so the 6 weeks haven't existed for her. As someone who has a phobia for dentists, this seems like a worse kind of torture to me, and I was pleased that we didn't have to see her going through 2 hours of dental work. Instead we see Outie Gemma back in the corridor with a sore jaw and no recollection of what just happened. Gemma stops outside a room called Cold Harbour, which is the name of Mark's current file, and the one management at Lumon are getting very excited about. We then get a flashback from Mark's perspective, which he experiences from his coma-like state while Devon watches on. It shows him meeting Gemma in her office the day after they've been on a date. There's then a time jump, and the next flashback shows them living together, and Mark has bought a bassinet, telling us that there's a baby on the way. Then there's a beautiful montage sequence, where we see time passing by the books on their home office changing repeatedly, alongside some home video footage of Gemma and the scenes of the 2 of them being very happy together. Next there's a dinner party scene with Devon, Rickon, Gemma and Mark. Quite sad to see, because Devon, Mark and Rickon all seem more relaxed and closer together in this scene than we've seen them in the future timeline, where Gemma is gone. Devon tries to give Gemma some wine, and when she refuses the offer, a quick exchange of glances ends with Devon knowing why. Then there's a very upsetting scene where Gemma loses the baby. While it's not particularly graphic, the little glimpses we get of this devastating moment are really hard to watch. Time then jumps forward to a scene with Miss Casey and Innie Mark on the 7th floor from last season. We don't see much of it though, because the camera moves quickly and shows a room we've never seen before. It looks like an inverted version of the MDR team, with the people sat at desks monitoring the MDR team through their computers. This weird shadow team all bear a striking resemblance to the real MDR team members, though they're all dressed in white short-sleeved shirts like Milchick often wears. Mr. Drummond then appears, talking to the doctor about Gemma. The doctor seems very fond of Gemma, even though Drummond reveals that she tried to break his fingers once. Then we're in the Butzman Fertility Centre with Mark and Gemma in another flashback scene. There's a telltale water drop logo on the form Gemma's filling out that tells us Lumon are involved here too. There's then a surreal moment where Mark looks to be getting changed in a corridor in the Lumon building, but he then goes through a door and he's with Gemma in their home. He's injecting her with some sort of fertility medicine. Then it's back to the testing floor with Gemma, and the doctor is asking her questions about the room she's been in. The shadow Mark is monitoring a scan of her brain while this is all going on. The doctor is trying to find out if she has any memory of what her innies were up to in these rooms, or if there's any residual emotions left over. Gemma is more interested in the Cold Harbour room she spotted. This is a new room to her and she's not been inside it yet. The doctor tells Gemma that she'll see the world again once she's completed Cold Harbour, though he's evasive when she asks if she'll see Mark. He talks vaguely about how Kia will take away Mark's pain, like he's taken away Gemma's. despite the fact that Gemma's been trapped on the testing floor for a long time and looks to be in a great deal of pain. There's then a very brief flashback scene where Gemma is on her own, looking distraught, and Mark can be heard off-screen, seemingly unaware. Given the events so far this episode, it seems like another setback on their fertility journey. Back in the current timeline, Devon and Rugabi are having a more amicable conversation. Devon explains her idea about using the birthing cabin we saw in last season to contact Mark's innie. Rugabi is very dismissive of the idea though, despite it seeming quite smart. Then Devon suggests that she could contact Cobell to see if she'll help them. Rugabi is dead against this idea and explains that she was raised by the company and would never turn on them. Devon ignores Rugabi and says that she's going to call Cobell anyway. Rugabi then decides that she's going to leave Mark and Devon to it, which might seem pretty cold given that she's started this procedure on Mark and she's now dumping him. But from her perspective, contacting Cobell is as good as telling Lumon what they're up to, so it's a sensible decision if you look at it purely from Rugabi's perspective. Devon is about to call Cobell, but Mark starts mumbling something indistinct. We then find out it's Chikhai Bardo, the name of this episode. In a flashback, he's having a conversation about a picture which Gemma is interpreting as Chikhai Bardo, a Buddhist term that refers to the first stage of death. She's doing this because some strange picture association game that she's been sent by the clinic. Mark and Gemma squabble over the test she's doing. Neither know why she's been sent it, but Mark is suspicious, while Gemma's actually enjoying doing it. There's now a tension in their relationship, which seems to be down to the fertility issues and the strain of going through treatment. Next we jump forward again and Gemma is in another room on the testing floor, this time one that simulates extreme turbulence on a flight. For some reason Gemma's dressed differently for the flight, and Dr. Bauer is pretending to be a flight attendant. Drummond is then talking to the doctor. Cold Harbour is at 96%. He tells the doctor that he'll have to say goodbye to Gemma once it's complete. It's then back to a different innie Gemma, in a different room, getting tortured in a different way. This time she's writing a punishing amount of thank you cards for gifts at Christmas time. This doesn't seem like the worst punishment in the world, but she's written so many that she can no longer write and her hand is aching. Then Auntie Gemma is in her living quarters when the doctor comes to visit her. He tells her that Mark has remarried and has a daughter. This is a calculated lie to deliver the most hurt and pain to her. She accuses him of lying, but it's clear she's not completely sure what's true and what isn't. The doctor then insinuates that her innie might be experiencing happiness in the rooms that she's not aware of. He clearly thinks that Gemma is in love with him, or at least one of her innie versions is. The doctor then starts mocking one of Gemma's books, and she clonks him with the chair, and I've never felt less sympathy for someone who's been sucker punched. She steals his pass and tries to escape. She ends up taking the lift up, but transitions to Miss Casey when she gets to the 7th floor. Miss Casey doesn't make it far, as Milchick, looking flustered, intercepts her and sends her back down to the testing floor. We then see Mark and Gemma's last conversation before she dies, or more likely didn't die. Mark was too busy with his work to go with her to the party that she was going to, otherwise he would have been in the car too. As she leaves she says I love you to Mark, and he's too busy to reply. She calls him out on it and he does reciprocate eventually, but it's sad that this was their last conversation together. Then we see the police visiting Mark to inform him of Gemma's accident. He has a similar look of devastation as Gemma does in the current timeline after her failed escape attempt. In the final scene of the episode, we see Mark come around, with Devon watching over him. He looks groggy but basically okay, though without any more medical support from Rugabi, he's most likely in for a rough ride. And that was a change of pace. This episode took us away from the usual fun of the 7th floor and delivered a more emotionally charged episode with a focus narrowly on Gemma's journey. I liked how the episode kept its focus on mostly one character, as there was a lot to get through to fill in some of Mark and Gemma's backstory, as well as their current situation on the testing floor. And through this more focused method of storytelling, we've learned a lot of things that flesh out the history of the characters more. Mark and Gemma's relationship was covered at blistering speed, with some clever montages used to accelerate us through the early stages of their relationship, through to their more recent struggles to have a child. I thought it was an excellent depiction of the heartbreak and frustration fertility issues can cause, and how it can put a strain on even the strongest relationships. I think it was significant that Lumon were taking blood from Mark and Gemma when they first met, and were also behind the fertility clinic that they visited. It's not completely clear what exactly went on with Gemma between the night that she left for the party, and when we eventually see her as Miss Casey on the 7th floor, but we are getting a little bit more detail now at least. For example, we know that Lumon were involved in Mark and Gemma's life well before Mark signed up to become severed, so it doesn't seem so far-fetched that they had a hand in the event that led up to her reported death. Previously I'd wondered if she was some sort of reanimated zombie following dying in the crash, though now it seems more likely that her death was faked. The only thing pointing against this is the fact that Mark said he identified her body. We did see in this episode how Lumon were able to get lookalikes, so perhaps that's what happened there. Or maybe they just sedated Gemma to make her appear dead from a distance. Had Mark been on top of his work that evening, he'd have been in the car with Gemma when the crash is supposed to have happened. Does that mean Mark would have suffered the same fate too, or were they looking specifically for Gemma? It now seems clear that Mark and the rest of the MDR's team has been directly linked to the testing floor rooms. Each room is named after a file that the team have worked on, and the rooms are only available once the file is complete. These rooms all seem to be centred around removing some pain or unpleasantness from people's lives by having innies do it for them instead. So rather than having one general purpose innie who can do a full shift at work, Gemma has multiple innies, and they're all going through various unpleasant tasks. Most of us would jump at the chance to let a different version of ourselves do things like fill out taxes, attend medical appointments, or catch up on boring admin. Though there's a moral question about this service, as the innies are being subjected to a life of never-ending unpleasantness. The innies on the 7th floor are basically slaves, but their existence seems pleasant compared to Gemma's innies, who are either constantly flying somewhere on a plane, having a never-ending dentist appointment, or writing an unlimited number of thank you cards. In small doses, these things are slightly unpleasant, but if it's all you ever experience, it will quickly become a version of hell. So the reason the management are so excited about finishing Cold Harbour is that it will complete the work on Gemma, and presumably the procedure they've done on her will become a new product. We've had a glimpse of this kind of thing last season, when you saw the senator's wife being severed for childbirth, but the experience Gemma is going through is like Severance on steroids, as you can cut out everything you don't want to do and farm it out to a legion of innie slaves that live inside your brain and are turned on and off with a chip. Obviously the implications for those innies is horrendous, but for the outie, they have the opportunity to live a pain-free existence. Though life would be very strange if you only had ups and never downs. While becoming a member of the leisure class would appeal to many people, I think it might lead to a hollow sort of existence. The best things in life are often made better by the struggle you've been through to get there. Without the struggle, I'm not sure the high points would feel so good. The flashback scenes have plenty of sadness in them, but I was just as moved by the scenes where we see Mark happy and in love with Gemma. Seeing their happier moments made sense of the desolation Mark has felt while he's been living without her. This pre-Severance version of Mark seems different to both the innie and outie versions of Mark we already know. While innie Mark isn't burdened by grief either, he's more childlike and innocent because he's only 2 years old. Flashback Mark still has the same cynical worldview as outie Mark, but he's not bitter like him. I find it an interesting example of how our experiences shape who we become. I talked in my last video about the potential fireworks when Ragabi and Devon shared screen time, but I wasn't expecting things to deteriorate so fast with them. Ragabi's acted quite callously with Mark, ditching him at the first sign of danger. However, Devon's idea to involve Corbell seems bonkers to me. Ragabi's reaction might seem extreme, but I have a feeling Mark will take her side over Devon's when he finds out what went on. While this episode gave us some big answers to long-standing questions, in true Severance style, it also created new mysteries. We've got the mysterious Shadow MDR team that seem to be monitoring things on both the severed and testing floors. While the facial features of these people don't look much like their MDR counterparts, they're all clearly groomed to look like members of the MDR team. We also have a new baddie to hate now, with us finding out more about Dr. Mauer. He seems to have developed a strong attachment to Gemma in her various innie forms, but regardless is happy to spend all day torturing her. It might be a kind of reverse Stockholm syndrome, apparently called Lima syndrome, where an abuser develops feelings for their victim. I'm pleased that Gemma wasn't willing to accept Mauer's attempt to bend her to his will. Lying to her about Mark getting married and having a child was one of the worst things anyone has done in the show so far, so I think a chair over the head was fair in this circumstance. While I typically shy away from stories with complicated timelines, I didn't mind this episode being told in flashbacks and jumps forward. It was so nicely done that jumping forward and backwards didn't feel jarring at all. I also loved how some of the visual sequences were put together in this episode. It's no surprise that this episode was composed of so many lovely shots though, as it was the first episode directed by Jessica Lee Cagney, who is the show's usual director of photography. I liked how she managed to make the pre-Severance life of Mark and Gemma look so drastically different from the outie world we've seen Mark inhabit in previous episodes. Rather than dim, miserable lighting, the Mark and Gemma scenes were full of soft tones and glowing light sources. I've talked before about how images from episodes of Severance could be hung in a gallery, and I think this episode contains dozens of beautifully arranged shots. Obviously, if it was a terrible story that looked this good, it wouldn't be a good show. But as the story is great already, the visuals really helped elevate the series to the next level. My favourite line this episode came from Gemma when she said, "Can you please speak like a normal person?" to Dr. Mauer. Lumon employees have a tendency to slip into that weird, almost biblical way of speaking at times. Milchick was picked up for his use of long words in his performance review, but it's actually something most of the unsevered staff members do. Gemma calling this out shows that she's not drinking the Kool-Aid and is her own woman. When we first see Gemma on the testing floor, she's drifted off into a flashback and the nurse asks, "Where did you go?" We then see this line repeated when Devon asks Mark where he went at the end of the episode after he comes out of his sort of coma. There's another similar bit of repetition. We see the doctor saying he loves Gemma and her not responding until prompted. Then, when Gemma leaves Mark in the final scene before the crash, she says she loves him and he's too absorbed in what he's doing to reply until Gemma prompts him. I have a feeling that this repetition pattern between the outie and innie world has happened in other episodes too. Please let me know in the comments if you can remember any other examples from past episodes. Did you notice Dr. Mauer in the flashback scene at the fertility clinic? He walked through the back of the shot and is very easy to miss. But if you watch carefully, he seems to give Gemma a significant look. So I'm seeing this as proof that Lumon and Dr. Mauer were up to something shady before Gemma's alleged car crash. This episode is called Chikhai Bardo. We see Gemma reference this when she's looking at the cards Lumon sent her. In some forms of Buddhism, Chikhai Bardo is the transitional space between life and death, which seems like Gemma was foreshadowing her own purgatory that she'd be forced to live through on the testing floor. The novel The Death of Ivan Ilyich was referenced twice in this episode. I don't think this is a mistake, because the book by Leo Tolstoy explores themes that are relevant to Severance. The book is said to play around with the idea of the perils of living life without meaning, as well as looking down on petty materialistic lifestyles. Tolstoy talks about the difference between an artificial life and an authentic life in this book. This seems very relevant to me about the decision about whether to be severed or not. Severance is an artificial way to numb yourself to life's pain, but it's also numbing you from life altogether too. While living authentically might expose you to more pain, you'll also be living more as a result. To me, the testing floor feels like a version of Room 101 from George Orwell's book 1984. In that story, Room 101 is a torture chamber where people are sent to confront their greatest fears and nightmares. The rooms Gemma enters in this episode have a similar quality, and I wonder if the themes of each room were specifically chosen because they were her worst fears. It makes me wonder what will be waiting for me on the testing floor, most likely endless traffic jams and awkward social interactions. I found it interesting that the nurse had to have her finger pricked to gain entry to the rooms on the testing floor. Extra security like this on the lift would have stopped Gemma from escaping, but I suppose there are limits to how many times you can lightly stab your employees with needles. I do think there's a reason that they showed this extra bit of security to us though. Maybe because Gemma will exploit it somehow in a later episode to escape. There are some interesting music choices in this episode. When Gemma is writing her thank you notes, Baby It's Cold Outside is playing on the radio. The lyrics of the song depict a man pushing himself onto a woman while she tries to push him away, which if you take it literally, comes across a bit creepy and coercive. While the way it's sung makes it sound like cheeky fun, I've always thought that the lyrics of this song are a bit creepy. Just like Dr. Maurer is a bit creepy towards Gemma throughout the episode. The other notable song was I'll Be Seeing You by Billie Holiday, which is about fondly remembering a lover and seeing evidence of their relationship in everyday places and objects. So this has parallels to the way both Mark and Gemma are reminiscing about their relationship in this episode. I don't know if this bit of trivia is too obvious to mention, but it now seems certain that the weird twins we saw with the MDR team on the Ortbo episode are the same people in the Shadow MDR team that we saw in this episode. The card we see Gemma holding when she's talking about Chikhai Bardo is the same design as the card Dylan stole from Optics and Design in Season 1. The fact that this card was most likely made on the severed floor of Lumon makes it even more suspicious that it was sent by the company to Gemma. There are some revealing details on IMDb about the next episode, so close the video now if you don't want to hear any spoilers. With that said, episode 8 is going to be called Sweet Vitriol, and the cast list hints at what we're going to be seeing. For starters, Patricia Arquette is listed as appearing in the episode, so we're going to be seeing Corbell at some stage. The 3 new members of the MDR team we saw in the first episode are also listed, which I'm happy about because I love Bob Balaban. The description of the episode doesn't give much away though, as it just says discoveries are made, which you could say about literally every episode of Severance. Still, it's reasonable to assume that Devon carries through with her threat to call Corbell, and that will be how she gets back into the story. Whether she'll be working for or against Lumon is anybody's guess though. Lorne is also listed as appearing in this episode, which means we'll hopefully be seeing more goats in this episode too. In terms of the direction of the story, now we've caught up with Gemma's situation, I think the scene is set for the MDR team to follow their directions to the lift, and maybe even try and get down to the testing floor. Though because there's 3 episodes still to go in the season, it's impossible it'll be that easy to find Gemma and rescue her. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I really appreciate you taking the time to share this episode of Severance with me. If you've enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe. I'd also love to hear your theories and ideas in the comments. Goodbye.